Congratulations, you've just joined the Rebel Alliance. Pretty exciting, huh? Well, until tomorrow when you realise your starfighter barely works, your commander snores louder than a Wookiee, and Darth Vader might personally drop in to make sure you regret every life choice you've made. In this video, we're going to explore what it was really like to live as a rebel by imagining you, a regular person, trying to survive a day like they do. So sit back, grab a snack and let the galaxy fade around you. Now, let's begin. X-Wings, TIE Fighters screaming past a Star Destroyer, Luke Skywalker blowing up the Death Star. It's all kinda nice, but that's not where it all started. The rebellion started with a cold knot of dread in the stomach of 1,000 different people, this slow dawning realization that something was going terribly, terribly wrong. When Supreme Chancellor Palpatine declared the war over and the Galactic Empire born, a huge sigh of relief went out. For a lot of folks, especially on the core worlds like Coruscant, Alderaan or Chandrila, the change was sold as a good thing. Peace. No more droid armies marching on your city. We have a strong, decisive leader to guide us into a new, orderly age. They even threw parades. There were massive ticker-tape parades on Coruscant for the birth of the Empire. But if you scratched beneath that shiny, polished surface, the cracks started to show immediately. The first thing to go was the Senate. Oh, it still existed for a while, but its power, its real teeth, got funneled directly to the Emperor. It became a talking shop, a place for senators to feel important, while real decisions were made behind closed doors by Palpatine and his inner circle. Planetary governors, often elected or appointed locally, found themselves reporting to new regional authorities called Moffs. They were military men, hardliners, who reported straight to the top. Their job wasn't to govern, it was to control. And the army? The brave clone troopers we all watched on the holonet fighting alongside Jedi. Their armor got a new paint job, white and sharp and impersonal, and they became the Stormtrooper Corps. Their mission shifted from defending the Republic to enforcing the Empire's will. The propaganda machine was incredible. Any dissent was labelled as separatist sympathy, which was basically the worst thing you could be accused of. It was a brilliant, terrifying strategy. They made resistance sound unpatriotic, but some people had their eyes wide open. This is where our story really begins. With a handful of individuals who saw the writing on the wall in big bold letters. They were right there, in the belly of the beast. The big name you've got to know here, the absolute cornerstone, is Mon Mothma. She was a senator from Chandrila, youngish but incredibly sharp. Chandrila is known for its philosophy and pacifism, and Mothma was the picture of a diplomat. Calm, eloquent, respected, but underneath that calm exterior was a spine of pure durasteel. She started having, let's call them, unofficial gatherings with other senators who shared her fears. The most important of these was Bail Organa. Now, Bail is a fascinating character. He's a prince, a consort to Queen Breha, so he's actual royalty. Alderaan is a planet that champions peace and art and culture, but Bail was also a pragmatist. He had seen the horrors of the Clone Wars up close, and he recognized the same patterns emerging. He was well connected, incredibly wealthy, and had a moral compass that just wouldn't bend. He and Mon Mothma became the heart of the political resistance. And then you had guys like Garm Bel Iblis from Corellia. Corellians, right? They build starships and they've got a reputation for being tough, stubborn, and not taking orders from anybody. Bel Iblis was all of that. He was a patriot who believed in the idea of the Republic, but he had zero patience for political games. He saw the Empire as a direct insult to Corellian independence. So you had this unlikely alliance. The serene philosopher from Chandrila, the noble prince from Alderaan, and the fiery, stubborn shipbuilder from Corellia. They didn't always get along. They argued constantly about strategy, but they all agreed on the fundamental, terrifying truth. The Empire was a cancer, and if someone didn't start cutting it out, it would consume the entire galaxy. Now you have to understand the sheer guts this took. This was high treason. The penalty was execution. It would be a very public, very messy affair, designed to make an example of you. Your family would be disgraced, your homeworld punished. Every time these senators met, they were gambling with billions of lives. So the secrecy was insane. They used coded messages. They'd meet in Bail Organa's private apartments, or in a secluded box at the Coruscant Opera House, speaking in metaphors about art and music while really discussing which shipyard might be sympathetic to their cause. They were planting the very first fragile seeds of what would become the Rebel Alliance. But the crucial thing, the part that a lot of people miss, the The rebellion wasn't born in fancy offices on Coruscant. That's only one side of the coin. While Mon Mothma and Bail Organa were trying to build a political resistance from the top down, the Empire's own brutality was creating a whole different kind of rebel out in the Outer Rim. This was a grassroots movement that exploded from the bottom up. See, the Empire's greed was its own worst enemy. For folks on Coruscant, the Empire was a distant government, but for people on the frontier, on planets like Ryloth, or Sullust, or Dantooine, the Empire was the gang of thugs that showed up one day with paperwork, backed by stormtroopers, and started kicking down doors. They'd roll into a remote system, some planet that just wanted to be left alone to mine its minerals or farm its land, and they'd set up shop. They'd impose brutal quotas. They'd strip mine entire continents for resources to feed their endless war machine, leaving the planet a barren husk. They'd enslave entire populations, like the Wookiees on Kashyyyk, to work in the mines and shipyards. Local governments were dissolved. Anyone who complained vanished. So, organically, without any orders from Mon Mothma, without any grand plan, little pockets of resistance started to pop up like weeds through Duracrete. These were the first true rebel cells. They were farmers, miners, pilots, and mechanics who had just had enough. They were desperate people with nothing left to lose. One of the earliest and most famous of these cells was on a planet called Endor. Sound familiar? It has a history of rebellion going way back. But after the Empire took over, a fighter named Saw Gerrera started leading a partisan group. And Saw was a whole different beast. He was a survivor of Imperial oppression, and his philosophy was simple. Hit the Empire hard, hit them fast, and make them pay for every inch of ground. He was the sharp, angry, uncompromising edge of the rebellion, a stark contrast to the careful, measured approach of the politicians. And this, right here, was the central defining tension of the early rebellion. You had the political idealists. They believed in rules of engagement, in winning hearts and minds. Then you had the grassroots militants, like Saw Gerrera's partisans, who were already in a bloody, dirty fight for survival and thought the Old Republic was part of the problem. They believed in survival by any means necessary. Getting these two sides to even acknowledge each other was a nightmare. They didn't trust each other. The politicians in their Coruscant apartments thought the partisans were reckless, violent thugs who would bring the Empire's full, unimaginable wrath down on everyone before they were ready. This disconnect is so important to understand. The rebellion was never this single, unified, happy family. It was a shaky, tense coalition of people who hated the Empire more than they disliked each other. Bail Organa, to his credit, was one of the few who tried to bridge this gap. He used his resources to secretly funnel supplies, weapons, and intelligence to some of these scattered cells, like Saw's partisans. He knew their value, even if he disliked their methods. He was building connections, a nervous system for the rebellion, one fragile, secret handshake at a time. So how did these two completely different worlds, the shadowy political network and the scattered, angry partisan cells, ever come together? They needed a catalyst. They needed something so monstrous, so undeniably evil, that it would prove the militants right and force the politicians to stop talking and start acting. Something that would make the risk of inaction greater than the risk of war. That catalyst was the Death Star. The rumours started circulating among the early rebellion circles years before the station was finished. Whispered tales from engineers who had worked on the project and had a crisis of conscience. Stories of a mobile battle station with a weapon capable of destroying an entire planet. Most people, reasonably, thought it was a myth, an Imperial propaganda tool to scare everyone into line. A planet killer? It was ridiculous. The resources required would be astronomical. It had to be a lie, but a few, like Bail Organa, took that deadly seriously. He understood that if such a thing were real, it changed everything. It was the ultimate tool of terror. No planet, no matter how well defended, would ever be able to say no to the Empire again. The entire concept of rebellion would become meaningless if the Empire could just point a super laser at your homeworld and give you an ultimatum. This is where a lot of the early desperate missions were focused. They were trying to find the blueprints, confirm the station's existence, find a weakness. Spies were inserted into Imperial logistics divisions. Sympathetic shipping magnates were asked to report strange, massive component orders. It was a race against time, a race happening in the dark. And while they were racing, the Empire was tightening its grip. The ISB, the Imperial Security Bureau, became a constant lurking threat. They were the secret police, the thought police. They were experts at rooting out dissent. An offhand comment in a cantina about high taxes could land you in an interrogation room. Neighbours were encouraged to report on each other. The early rebel cells were being hunted down one by one. It was a dark, paranoid time. A time where you couldn't trust a transmission. You couldn't trust a new contact. And every single day you woke up wondering if this was the day the stormtroopers kicked in your door. The spark of rebellion in those early days was the most fragile thing in the galaxy. It was the grim determination in the eyes of a toy-click freedom fighter on Ryloth, staring down an ATST walker with nothing but a stolen blaster. It was about a simple, stubborn, almost foolish refusal to let the light go out. They were a handful of people standing in the path of a galactic hurricane, believing that somehow, if they stood together, they could make a difference. They were scared. They were disorganized. They were arguing amongst themselves, but they were there. And in that silence before the storm was the only thing standing between the galaxy and eternal darkness. And that, my friend, is how it all began. The moment you have to make the choice, do you keep your head down and try to live your life? Or do you answer the call to go from being a civilian, a nobody, to an outright outlaw? That's a whole other story, and it's a heavy one. So, we've talked about the big picture. Now, imagine your life. Really picture it. Maybe you're a cargo pilot, a real bucket of bolts jockey, running agricultural equipment and recycled plastoid between the mid-rim systems. It's not a glamorous job. You're basically a truck driver in space, but it's a living. You have a small rented berth on a grimy orbital station, like Ord Mantell or Taris. You have a favourite cantina, the Rusty Hydrant, where you know the bartender, a grumpy Weequay, who always gives you an extra shot in your Corellian whiskey. You have a couple of pilot buddies you play sabak with. Your biggest worries are making the next loan payment on your beat-up YT-1200 freighter, hoping the hyperdrive doesn't conk out in the middle of nowhere, and avoiding Imperial customs inspections, because the paperwork is always a nightmare, and they always find something to fine you for. Or maybe you're a farmer on a quiet agri-world like Dantooine or Sorgan. Your family has worked the same land for 3 generations. You know the smell of the soil after a rain. You get up with the sun. You tend to your blurg herds or your root crops. You worry about the seasonal rains and the grain prices on the galactic market. The Empire feels a million miles away, just a logo on the occasional supply ship that comes by to pick up the harvest. Your life is the land. It's simple. It's hard, honest work. Life isn't perfect, but it's yours. It's predictable. Then the galaxy gets darker, inch by inch, and you don't even notice how bad it's gotten until you trip over something you can't ignore. For the pilot, it starts with the taxes. The Imperial security tariffs and hyperlane tolls keep creeping up, eating into your profit until you're barely breaking even. You have to take riskier routes, skirting nebulas and uncharted space to avoid the official toll points. Then one day, you're hauling a perfectly legitimate cargo of medpacks and Bacta patches to a mining colony that's had an outbreak of lungworm. You did the paperwork, it's all in order. But an Imperial inspector, some fresh-faced lieutenant who looks like he's never been outside a starbase, boards your ship. He sniffs around, decides your cargo manifest has a discrepancy. The serial numbers on the medpack containers are 1 digit off from the forms. It's a typo, a simple mistake. He confiscates your entire shipment for potential contraband trafficking. You're left sitting in your empty hold, ruined. And as you're arguing with him, you see out the viewport that your confiscated medical supplies are just being loaded onto an Imperial Gazanti-class transport. They weren't confiscated, they were stolen, right in front of you. The law isn't there to protect you. It's a weapon they use to take whatever they want. For the farmer, it's the Imperial requisition. A contingent of stormtroopers shows up one day. They have a government mandate, signed by the Moff. They're taking 80% of your season's harvest to supply the local garrison and forward deployment needs. They pay you a fixed, state-mandated price that's a fraction of what you'd get on the open market. When you try to protest, your hands still covered in soil, the stormtrooper captain just stares at you through that expressionless white helmet. And there is no need for words. You stand there, helpless, and watch them haul away the food, that was supposed to feed your family, pay your workers, and keep your farm running for another year. The cold knot of anger in your gut is joined by a feeling of utter powerlessness. This is the slow burn. The moment you realize that the peace and security the Empire promised is just another name for slavery with better branding. That your life, your work, your family, they don't belong to you anymore. They belong to the Empire, and they can take it all away on a whim, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. The world you knew is a lie. The safety you felt was an illusion. That's when you hear it. Maybe it's in that same cantina, the rusty hydrant. You're staring into your glass, thinking about the medical shipment, wondering how you're going to tell your loan officer you can't make the payment. A stranger slides onto the stool next to you. They nurse a drink for a minute, then nod towards you. Rough day, they ask. And maybe it's the whiskey, or maybe it's the sheer weight of the silence you've been carrying, but you find yourself talking. You tell them about the inspector, stolen cargo, fines. Then when you're done, they slide a data card across the sticky bar top. If you're tired of getting pushed around, they say, there are people who are pushing back. Then they finish their drink, drop a credit chip on the bar, and are gone before you can even ask their name. That data card sits in your pocket for days. Right now, you're just a disgruntled citizen, a victim of bureaucracy. The moment you put that card in an isolated terminal in the back of a public library, you're a traitor. You're committing your first act of sedition. So why? Why would anyone take that risk? It's different for everyone, and it's rarely just one reason. It's a messy, complicated stew of emotions. For some, it's pure, undiluted rage. For others, it's a cold, clear moral imperative. You look at what's happening, the oppression, the slavery on Wookiee worlds, the sheer, grinding injustice of it all, and you know, in your soul, that you can't just stand by. It's the unbearable weight of your own conscience. This was the kind of person Bail Organa and Mon Mothma appealed to, and for a few, it's about belonging. The Empire has made the galaxy a cold, lonely and suspicious place. The idea of finding a community, a family of people who believe in the same things you do, who watch your back, is a powerful emotional draw. The rebellion becomes your new home, your new tribe. This is a powerful motivator, but it's also a vulnerable one. Losing that new family can break a person completely. But let's be brutally, painfully honest about what you're giving up. This isn't like enlisting in the Republic Army during the Clone Wars, where you're a celebrated hero. You're joining an outlaw band. You are sacrificing everything. The rebellion doesn't offer pensions or glory. It offers a cause and a likely death. First and most painfully, your identity. Your old life is over. The moment you sign on, you have to sever all ties. You can't contact your family, because if the ISB ever links you to them, they will be used as leverage. They will be arrested, interrogated, which is a polite word for tortured, and probably executed publicly to draw you out. You have to let your parents think you're dead, or that you're a coward who ran away. You have to break your mother's heart to save her life. That's the first and often the heaviest price. You become a ghost to the people who loved you. Second, your comfort. Forget your apartment, your favourite cantina, a warm, home-cooked meal, a soft bed. Your life now is starfighters that smell of ozone, sweat and fear. It's makeshift bases on frozen wastelands like Hoth or swampy hellholes like Dagobah. It's military rations that taste like wet cardboard and nutrient paste that has the consistency of glue. You'll be tired, hungry, cold and dirty more often than not. Personal possessions are a liability. Everything you own, you carry on your back. That's the real beating heart of the rebellion. So you've made the choice. You've done a few odd jobs for the cause, moving boxes you didn't open to people you didn't know, and now you're officially in. You've been assigned to a cell, given a code name that you're supposed to respond to without laughing. The romantic adrenaline of being a secret outlaw is starting to wear off, and it's replaced by a much more immediate, gut-churning feeling, sheer unadulterated incompetence. This is the part they never ever put in the recruitment hollows. The rebellion, especially in the early days, was a mess. A beautiful, necessary, inspiring mess, but a mess nonetheless. There was no basic training academy with obstacle courses and simulators. There was no standardized manual called So You Want to Be a Rebel. There was just a ragged collection of people who had, through luck or desperation, managed to stay alive a few months longer than you, trying to pass on whatever scraps of knowledge they had so that you wouldn't get yourself and everyone else turned into a fine red mist on your first outing. Your new home, It's a repurposed mining outpost on a planet like Dantooine, where the grass is purple and the Kinraths will eat your face if you wander too far. Your barracks are sleeping rolls on a hard, cold floor. The mess hall is a campfire and a portable heater that's always running out of fuel. And your training ground is whatever patch of dirt, rock or swamp isn't actively trying to kill you that particular day. The chain of command is flexible. Your instructor for weapons probably isn't a retired Republic Marine. It's someone like Kale. Kale is a big guy with hands like a Wookiee and a perpetual frown. He used to be a security guard on a corporate freighter, hauling luxury goods before the Empire nationalized the shipping lanes, and he lost his job. He got into a bar fight with a couple of off-duty stormtroopers over a spilled drink. He says they started it, and had to run for his life. So now, by default, he's the closest thing your cell of 20 people has to a weapons expert. He knows how to handle a blaster pistol, mostly to scare off cargo thieves. But hey, that's more than you know. He's not a teacher, he's a guy who's been in a few scrapes and is pissed off about it. Your first lesson, the blaster rifle. Not the sleek A280S you see the rebel troopers carrying on Hoth. I'm talking about the old clunky Blastech DH-17, or maybe even a salvaged Clone Wars era DC-15 that's been passed from cell to cell. Its stock scratched, and its power coupler held together with binding tape. It's seen more action than most of the people holding it. Kyle gathers your group of 5 new recruits. You're a mix. There's you, the cargo pilot, who's only ever used a ship's targeting computer. There's a Twi'lek woman who was a programmer for a Coruscant tech firm. A Rhodian who was a short-order cook. A young kid who was a droid mechanic. You are not exactly the galaxy's most promising fighting force. So the first rule, the one you forget and I'll kick you into next week, is don't point this thing at anything you don't intend to turn into a smoking crater. That includes me, your buddy standing next to you, and especially your own feet. This is your life for the next few weeks. Hours of dry firing, practicing your aim and trigger pull without a power pack, until your arms ache and your shoulder is a giant bruise, learning to strip the blaster down to its component parts and clean it in near total darkness. Because power outages are constant, and you might need to do this in a speeding transport. There's a chronic, desperate shortage of power packs, so most of your target practice is just aiming at rocks and pretending. The goal isn't to make you a sniper. The goal is brutally simple, to make you capable of hitting a stormtrooper-sized target from 30 meters away without closing your eyes. It's a low bar, but in the chaos of a firefight, it's a crucial one. But knowing how to shoot is only half the battle. The other, more important half is not getting shot. This is where survival training comes in, and it's even less glamorous. Your instructor for this might be someone like Lyra, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She grew up on a frontier world like Onderon or Dantooine, and knows how to live off the land in a way that city folk like you can barely comprehend. She teaches you the boring essential stuff, how to dig a latrine trench so it doesn't drain into and contaminate your fresh water supply, how to identify which grubs, roots and creepy crawlies are edible, and which will make your insides liquefy in a most unpleasant fashion. "See this six-legged thing that looks like it's judging you?" she'll say, holding up a wriggling insect. "Tastes like chicken. This shiny blue mushroom that looks like a work of art will kill you before you hit the ground. Don't get creative. Stick to the list." She demonstrates how to move through a forest without sounding like a runaway bantha, how to place your feet, how to use cover, how to freeze when you hear a noise. She shows you how to read the stars for basic navigation when your datapad's battery inevitably dies, and how to find water by following certain types of moss or the behavior of local animals. It's blistered hands from digging, a constellation of itchy bug bites, and the culinary delight of eating something that tastes vaguely like boiled leather. But Lyra will drill it into your head that this is more important than target practice, because the Empire can't kill you if they can't find you. Silence, patience, and knowing how to disappear into the environment are your first best weapons. Then there's the tech side. Maybe you're the lucky one, like the droid mechanic kid. You have a useful, tangible skill. You get to spend your days with the astromechs, helping patch up the cell's single, battered shuttle. But for everyone else, there's comms training. This is usually taught by the most stressed-out, caffeine-fueled person in the cell, because comms discipline is the single most important thing that keeps everyone alive. A sloppy transmission can bring a Star Destroyer down on your head. You learn about burst transmitters, devices that send a compressed message in a fraction of a second to avoid long-term detection. You memorize a dozen different, seemingly innocent code phrases. You practice setting up and breaking down a portable comms unit over and over and over again, until you can do it blindfolded, with one hand in the pouring rain. Speed is life. If an Imperial patrol is scanning for signals, you have minutes, sometimes seconds, to shut everything down, pack up and vanish without a trace. And for a select few, there's Starship Basics. This is where your own background as a pilot finally became useful. But even then, it's not the thrill of flying. It's emergency repairs and worst-case scenarios. You'd gather a small group around the cell's beat-up Z-95 Headhunter, a ship that was old during the Clone Wars and was now missing half its plating, exposing a spaghetti-like tangle of wires and conduits. We'd spend hours practicing swapping out power converters, patching hull breaches with quick-setting emergency sealant that got everywhere, and worst of all, hot wiring a ship's ignition after a primary core shutdown. It was messy, dangerous work. Everyone's hands were permanently stained with coolant and grease. But the philosophy was simple. If the pilot is dead or unconscious, someone else in the cabin needs to have a faint clue how to get the ship moving. You don't need to be an ace dogfighter. You just need to be able to point the nose away from the enemy, calculate the most basic hyperspace jump to the nearest safe-ish system, and push the big lever forward. It's the difference between a story and a statistic. You feel clumsy and useless. You make stupid mistakes and get yelled at. You go to sleep sore, hungry, and wondering what insane series of life choices led you to this cave. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something changes. The blaster stops being a foreign weight and becomes an extension of your arm. You can strip and clean it in 2 minutes flat. You can look at a patch of forest and instinctively know the quietest path through it. You can start a fire without a lighter. You can look at a starscape and know which way is north. You're not a soldier, not in the Imperial sense with polished boots and parade ground precision. You're a survivor, you're resourceful. You've been trained not for textbook warfare, but for the chaotic, unpredictable, and dirty reality of a guerrilla war. The Empire has sprawling academies, screaming drill sergeants, and pristine uniforms. You have Kale's tired size, Lyra's sharp wisdom, a damp cave, and a shared, grim determination not to die today. So you've survived the cave. You've learned how to not shoot your own foot off, how to eat things that would make a bantha gag, and how to run for your life at the sound of an alarm. For most rebels, that's where the story stays. But for a select few, there's another path, a call that pulls you up out of the atmosphere and into the black. Now, you don't get a crisp new orange flight suit and a heroic pat on the back from General Medine. For you, it was a grimy datapad, shoved into your hands by a cell leader whose name you never even knew. It contained coordinates for a dead system in the Outer Rim, just a number and a spectral class, along with a code phrase to give to a Bothan freighter captain who smelled distinctly of old cheese and engine coolant. A week of cramped, nerve-wracking travel later, you're standing on the dusty, wind-scoured landing field of a hidden base on a planet so forgettable it doesn't even have a name. The starfighters of the Rebel Alliance in these early days weren't fresh off the Incom or Cohen-Sayer assembly lines. They were a motley, beautiful, terrifying collection of hand-me-downs, salvaged wrecks, bribed-over defectors, and outright stolen property. This scrap heap fleet is where you really see the personality of the rebellion, its desperation and its brilliance, etched into every scorched hull and welded patch. First, you have the workhorse, the poster boy, the Incom T-65 X-Wing. It's the beauty, the star of the show, the fighter that makes every kid want to be a pilot. This isn't a perfect, sterile machine. It's a living, breathing fighter that's been loved, beaten to hell, and lovingly patched back together by a crew of dedicated mechanics who are just as much heroes as the pilots flying them. The X-Wing is a symbol of defiance, yeah, but it's also a testament to our sheer, stubborn resourcefulness. We took a brilliant design and kept it flying with spit, hope, and parts liberated from Imperial scrapyards. It's a balanced fighter, good for dogfighting, decent for bombing runs, with shields that can take a punch and a hyperdrive that lets you get to the fight and, more importantly, get away from it. It's the fighter of a generalist, a pilot who needs to be ready for anything. Then you have the A-Wing. Oh man. If the X-Wing is a sturdy, reliable battle axe, The A-Wing is a scalpel. It's a razor blade taped to a rocket. It's fast, I mean stupid, recklessly, physics-defyingly fast. It's basically a cockpit, 2 massive engine cones, and a pair of laser cannons bolted on the front. It has minimal armor, shields you could sneeze through, and no hyperdrive. It's a pure interceptor, a hit-and-run artist. Flying an A-Wing, it's a personality disorder. The pilots who love them are a special breed of crazy. They're the adrenaline junkies, the show-offs, the ones who live by the motto, if you can hit me, you can have me. They're the ones who will fly through the superstructure of a Star Destroyer just to prove a point. In a dogfight, when a swarm of TIEs is bearing down on your slower bombers, the sight of A-Wings screaming into the fray, breaking their formation apart with sheer, audacious speed, is enough to make you want to kiss them. They're chaotic, they're hard to control, and you're damn glad they're on your side. And you can't forget the Y-Wing, the old slow bomber. These things were ancient during the Clone Wars. They're slow, they're loud, they fly like a brick with a faulty repulsor lift, and they are ugly as a Hutt's backside. But let me tell you something. When you need a Star Destroyer's shield generator taken out, or you need to lay down a line of proton bombs that turns an Imperial garrison into a smoking crater, there is no better, more reliable friend than a Y-Wing. They're tough. They can absorb a staggering amount of punishment from turbo laser batteries and still somehow get their pilot home. Flying a Y-Wing takes a different kind of courage. It's ice in your veins. It's holding a steady, predictable bombing run, while every targeting computer in the Imperial fleet is painting a giant bullseye on your back. It's a flying tank, a stubborn beast of burden, and the pilots who fly them are the quiet, unshakable, unsung backbone of the Bomber Corps. They don't get the glory, but they win the wars. Your training, once you get to the squadron, is a whole different ballgame from the cave drills. Sure, there's classroom stuff, what we call chalk talk. You sit in a stuffy room with other newbies and a veteran pilot, maybe someone who actually flew for the Royal Naboo Security Forces, or survived the massacre at Gorman. And you learn the specs of your ship until you can recite power conversion rates and max G-turn tolerances in your sleep. You study holomaps of famous battles, analysing what went right and what went catastrophically wrong. You learn the weaknesses of Imperial capital ships, the sensor blind spots near the bridge tower, the vulnerable engine ports. But the real learning, the stuff that separates the live pilots from the dead ones, happens in 2 places, the cockpit and the sims. The simulators we had were inventive. They weren't the top-of-the-line, multi-million credit Imperial naval trainers with full motion platforms and holoprojectors. Ours were cobbled together from droid brains, old console parts, and a lot of wishful thinking. You'd sit in a real cockpit, but it was stripped down and wired into a bank of humming, overheating computers. The graphics were basic wireframes. The motion was a jerky, nauseating tilt, but the lessons were brutally, effectively realistic. Your instructor, a grizzled veteran who probably had more confirmed kills than he had teeth, would sit behind you or pipe his voice through your helmet, feeding you nightmare scenarios. But the single most important part of squadron life, the thing that keeps you alive more than any amount of training or any piece of equipment, is your squad mates. This isn't the Imperial Navy, where you're a faceless, numbered cog in a vast machine. In a rebel squadron, your wingman is your family. You eat together, you train together, you play sabacc together for toothpicks because no one has any credits, and you might very well die together. You learn each other's tells. You know that when Jax gets nervous, he hums an old, off-key Corellian drinking song. You know that when Lyra is concentrating, she goes completely silent, her breathing so calm it's scary. You know that Kyle is a crack shot, but has a tendency to chase a damaged TIE into an ambush, so you always have to watch his back. This bond is forged in the most intense crucible imaginable, combat. And nothing, absolutely nothing, can prepare you for your first real dogfight. The Sims are a quiet, controlled environment. Real space combat is a sensory overload of pure, unadulterated terror. Your cockpit is a deafening symphony of noise, the high-pitched scream of your engines, the percussive crump of your own laser cannons, the frantic, panicked beeping of your astromech droid as it alerts you to a missile lock. Your comm channel is a chaotic, overlapping torrent of voices, sharp with fear and adrenaline. It's chaos. Your heart is pounding so hard you can feel it in your teeth. You're pulling G-forces that make your vision tunnel into a grey haze at the edges. You see laser bolts the size of your fist flashing past your canopy, so close you can feel the heat. And in the middle of it all, you have to force your brain to work, to think, to lead your target, to manage your energy between engines and shields, to listen to your wingman's desperate calls over the roar of your own fear. So after months, maybe even years, of living in caves that smelled of damp rock, on rusty freighters where you slept in a hammock next to the hyperdrive, and in abandoned warehouses where you had to whisper, the word finally comes down. The cell is moving. We're consolidating. We've got a real base, a stronghold. The coordinates they give you lead to a jungle world orbiting a gas giant in the Yavin system. And when your transport drops out of hyperspace and you see that massive, banded red orb filling the viewport, you feel something you haven't felt in a long, long time. A flicker of genuine, unironic hope. Then you land on Yavin 4, and the reality of it hits you like a wall of heat. This is an ancient Masasi temple, a gigantic ziggurat that we've essentially squatted in. The Great Temple. It sounds grand, and it is in a crumbling, mysterious, almost intimidating kind of way. But man, the jungle surrounding it does not care about your rebellion, your cause, or your personal comfort. The environment is the first and most constant character in this chapter of the war. The humidity is oppressive. It's like walking into a wet, warm blanket that you can never take off. The air is so thick you feel like you're drinking it. It smells of rich, rotting vegetation, of sweet, cloying flowers that bloom at night, with a perfume that's almost too strong, and the constant faint buzz of insects, some of them as long as your finger. Your flight suit, if you're a pilot, or your fatigues, if you're infantry, are permanently damp with a mixture of sweat and ambient moisture. You develop a whole new, almost religious appreciation for the concept of dry socks. The jungle is a living entity that is always, relentlessly, trying to take everything back. Vines creep into the open hangar bays overnight, requiring crews to clear them every morning just to get the ships out. Strange, phosphorescent fungi grow in the cracks of the ancient stone walls. You learn very, very quickly to shake out your boots every single morning unless you want a nasty surprise from a nesting serpent or a venomous spider. But within this ancient, stubborn temple, we built a buzzing, frantic, and incredibly makeshift city. It was a testament to pure willpower. The main hangar bay carved into the base of the temple was the undeniable heart of the place. It was never, ever quiet. The sound was a constant, layered symphony of industry. The air in the hangar was a unique cocktail of smells, the sharp tang of ozone from electrical work, the bitter scent of engine coolant, the heavy smell of warm lubricant, and cutting through it all, the life-giving aroma of fresh, strong calf. It was the smell of work, of frantic purpose, of something being built. This single hangar bay was a microcosm of the entire alliance. You had the pilots, the prima donnas of the operation. They strutted around in their distinctive orange flight suits, which were already starting to look less like a uniform and more like a badge of honor. They'd be huddled in groups around their starfighters, deep in conversation with the true, unsung heroes, the mechanics and engineers. These men and women were absolute magicians. They kept ships flying with parts that had no logical business working together. Their relationship with the pilots was a special one, a mix of friendly ribbing, deep mutual respect, and shared stress. Then you had the ground pounders, the security detail. Their job was, in many ways, the most miserable on the base. While we in the hangar had the relative comfort of the temple interior, they were out on the perimeter. They stood guard in observation posts, swallowed by the jungle, in the oppressive mosquito-filled heat, staring into a solid wall of green, listening to the shrieks and chitters of unseen wildlife. They manned the sensor stations in rotating shifts, their eyes glued to scopes, watching for any tiny blip that might be an Imperial probe droid. They were the tripwire, the first line of defense. They had the most boring and yet most nerve-wracking job. Endless hours of nothing. You'd see them coming off a 12-hour shift, their uniforms soaked through with sweat, their faces gaunt and tight, with a special kind of tension that comes from sustained vigilance. They were the ones who, if they did their job right, would give you the 5 extra seconds you needed to scramble to your fighter when the alarm finally did sound. The nerve center, the brain of this entire operation, was the command center. It was set up in what was probably the main ceremonial chamber of the temple, a vast space with a high, vaulted ceiling that echoed with every sound. It was a scene of chaotic, organized bedlam. Giant holomaps flickered and shimmered in the dim light, displaying star systems, fleet movements, and intelligence reports. Comms officers with headsets clamped to their ears and voices hoarse from relaying messages sat at a bewildering array of consoles, many of which were clearly stolen from Imperial installations and rewired to work together. This is where you'd see the leadership, figures like Mon Mothma, looking serene but with tired eyes, or General Jan Dodonna, his face etched with the weight of command, studying the displays. The air in that room crackled with a low-grade, constant anxiety. But life wasn't all work and waiting for doom. You had to live there. The mess hall was a loud, crowded, and strangely democratic affair. The food was functional, mostly bland, rehydrated rations, the infamous Galaxy-class meal packs, supplemented by whatever local fruits and vegetables the bioscience team had determined weren't immediately poisonous. The coffee, however, was a thing of legend. It was thick, bitter, and strong enough to wake the dead. It was the most valuable commodity on the base, the currency of favour and friendship. The mess hall was the great social equaliser. You'd sit at a long table next to a Bothan spy, just back from a dangerous mission on Coruscant, a lanky Duros starfighter pilot telling a tall tale about evading a star destroyer, and a young human medic quietly eating her meal before a long shift in the infirmary. This was where the real intelligence network thrived. The gossip chain was faster and often more accurate than any official comm channel. You heard about which missions had succeeded, which cells had been lost, which general was arguing with which senator over strategy. And then there were the smugglers. They'd come drifting into the system every few days, their beat-up modified freighters, Corellian YT series, Sorosub transports, looking wildly out of place next to the military lines of the X-Wings. They were our necessary evil, our absolute lifeline to the outside galaxy. They brought in everything: crates of new blasters, precious medical supplies, encrypted data chips full of intelligence, and most importantly, the specialized parts the mechanics desperately needed. But they were a shifty, unpredictable bunch. You had the relatively professional operators, like a Lando Calrissian type, before he got respectable, all charm, capes, and a winning smile, looking to make a deal that benefited everyone, but mostly him. And then you had the rougher types, crews that looked like a walking cantina brawl, a grizzled human captain with a scar over his eye, a Wookiee co-pilot who communicated mostly in growls, a Twi'lek first mate who looked like she could kill you with her lekku. Dealing with them was a delicate, tense dance. We needed them, relied on them, but you never, ever trusted them completely. They didn't care about the cause, they cared about credits, and maybe a little bit about sticking it to the Empire if it was convenient. Every negotiation was fraught with paranoia. Were they Imperial agents setting a trap? Were they going to sell our location to the highest bidder the moment they left? But when their cargo ramps lowered and they unloaded a crate of fresh Bacta patches or a canister of desperately needed Tabana gas for the blasters, in that moment, they were the heroes of the day. At the end of a long, exhausting shift, if you were lucky, you had a few hours of downtime. People found ways to cope, to stay sane. Pilots and soldiers would huddle in a corner of the hangar or a repurposed anteroom, playing sabak or dejarik. Someone with a halleck set or a mandolin would start playing, and the sound of soft, hopeful music would drift through the cavernous halls. Some people would just find a quiet spot on the great stone steps of the temple, away from the noise and the crowd, and stare up at the giant red orb of Yavin dominating the sky. It was in those quiet, solitary moments that you felt the full weight of it all, the immense distance from anything you used to call home, the faces of friends who were gone, whose bunks were now empty. Yavin 4 was chaotic, uncomfortable, sweaty, and constantly living under the shadow of discovery. But for that short, precious time, it was home. It was the first time we weren't just a scattering of isolated cells, running and hiding. We were an alliance. We were building something tangible. It was a living, breathing glimpse of the galaxy we were fighting for. A place where all species could work together as equals, united by a shared dream. That feeling, that fragile, hard-won sense of community and purpose is what made the evacuation order so utterly devastating. When the alert blared and the Death Star appeared in the sky, it was the end of our home. We had to grab what we could, abandon the temple to the jungle, and scatter back into the cold, unforgiving stars, becoming fugitives once more. But for a little while, in that hot, humid ancient temple, surrounded by the sounds of life and industry, we were more than just rebels. We were a community. We had a place. And that memory of a home we built ourselves became a fuel that would burn long after the temple was just a memory. It was the proof that we could build something better, and that made all the sacrifice worth it. But then, there were the stories about him. We didn't call him Lord Vader. That title was too formal, too respectful. In the hushed tones of rebels who knew they were being hunted, he was just Vader, or the Dark Lord, or sometimes they wouldn't use a name at all. The man in the black suit, the machine, the breathing. That's what everyone mentioned first. A slow mechanical rhythmic inhalation and exhalation, like an iron lung for a giant. A sound that was both artificial and unnervingly alive. They said you heard it before you saw him, a dreadful prelude echoing down a smoke-filled corridor, cutting through the chaos of a firefight, a sound that made blood run cold. These stories were about what happened when a rebel cell had become too noisy, too successful, too much of a symbol. And High Command, or maybe Vader himself, decided they needed to be made an example of. You never saw him yourself, and thank the stars for that small mercy. There was a guy, his group was small, maybe 30 people. But they were good, they were clever. They'd been operating for months out of the ancient catacombs under the main city, hitting Imperial supply lines with precision and then vanishing back into the stonework. They got confident, maybe a little cocky. The lights winked out, the constant comforting hum of the generators just ceased, and they were plunged into a silence so profound it was louder than any noise. And then they heard it. He said it wasn't like listening to a man walk. It was like a force of nature moving through the corridors. The red bolts briefly illuminating the terrified faces of his friends. There would be shouts, screams, and then it would stop, abruptly, and the breathing would resume. He'd walk straight into a hail of blaster fire from 3 different directions, and the bolts hang in mid-air before being contemptuously flung back at the people who fired them with impossible accuracy. He said Vader would simply flick a black-gloved hand, and a 2-ton stone door would tear itself from its hinges and crush the rebel hiding behind it. That was Vader. He was a natural disaster wearing a cape. He was the reason we had a standing order, drilled into us from the moment we joined a cell. If Vader is confirmed on site, the mission is an automatic, immediate abort. Scatter. Don't try to fight, don't try to be a hero. Don't even try to save the data, just run. The only objective is to survive long enough to warn someone else. He was a lost condition. You know how we say that's not his health bar, that's his patience meter. But the galaxy is a big place, and even Vader couldn't be everywhere. For the smaller, more insidious problems, the Jedi hunts, the rooting out of Force-sensitive children, who might one day become a threat, the psychological breaking of resistant populations, the Empire had a different tool. A scalpel instead of a sledgehammer. They had the Inquisitorius, the Inquisitors. If Vader was a hurricane that leveled cities, the Inquisitors were the poison in the well. They were hunters. Specifically, they were hunters of people of hope, of anything that smelled of the Force. Most of them, the intelligence we pieced together suggested, were fallen Jedi themselves, knights and Padawans, who had been captured after Order 66, tortured, broken, and twisted into serving the very regime that destroyed their order. They were given the title Inquisitor, and they travelled the galaxy in a sinister vessel called the Purge, a name that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. They weren't as overwhelmingly powerful as Vader, but in some ways they were more terrifying because their evil was more intimate. They wore distinctive black and grey armour, often adorned with red, and they carried these terrifying double-bladed lightsabers. But their sabers had a horrifying trick. The blade could spin in a circle, like a propeller, allowing them to effortlessly deflect blaster bolts from all directions or simply grind through a blast door. The sound of that spinning blade was a herald of dread. Their most feared ability, however, was their sensitivity to the Force. This made them utterly different from any other Imperial agent. You couldn't just hide from an Inquisitor. They could feel things. They could sense strong emotions, especially fear, anger, and desperation. They could walk into a crowded spaceport cantina, a market on a city street, and just know who was hiding a secret, who had a connection to the rebellion, who had the faint, latent spark of the Force. There's a story from the lore, from the aquatic world of Mon Cala. The Empire was cracking down on dissent, and a small group of rebels aided by a Jedi who had been in hiding for nearly 2 decades, were trying to evacuate key personnel. The Empire sent an Inquisitor, the Ninth Sister, I believe, a massive brutish being whose cruelty was legendary. She didn't bother with subtlety or infiltration. She descended on the underwater city like a plague. She used the Force to crush escaping submarines as if they were tin cans, to create violent whirlpools that trapped entire squads of freedom fighters, to smash through reinforced transparisteel viewports, flooding entire sectors. She was hunting the one Jedi, but the collateral damage, the sheer slaughter of Mon Calamari and Quarren alike was immense. She didn't care. To an Inquisitor, we were all just bait, or obstacles, or target practice. The mission was to kill the Jedi. Everything else was noise. We were less than insects. The Inquisitors were masters of psychological warfare. They loved fear. They cultivated it. They'd often capture rebels not for immediate interrogation, but to use them as tools in their cruel games. They'd torture them publicly, make a gruesome spectacle of it, not necessarily to extract information, but to draw out the Jedi they were truly after. They wanted their primary prey to be emotional, desperate, reckless with grief and rage. It made them easier to corner, easier to kill. We weren't people to them, we were instruments to be used and broken. Knowing about their existence fundamentally changed how we operated. You learned to distrust any stroke of good luck, a sudden easy victory against a patrol, a conveniently unguarded Imperial supply depot. It felt like a trap, and sometimes it was. It felt like they were letting us get confident, letting us build up our strength and morale, just so they would have something more meaningful, more symbolic to smash when they finally decided to reveal themselves. They were gardeners of despair, allowing hope to grow only so they could rip it out by the roots. They were the reason our security protocols were so insanely complex. They were the reason we had to be excruciatingly careful with new recruits, as heartbreaking as that was. They were the reason our safe houses had multiple hidden escape routes. They were the reason we changed comms codes and recognition signals, not weekly, but sometimes daily. Vader and the Inquisitors were a psychological weapon on a galactic scale. They were the Empire's way of telling us that the rules of our reality did not apply, that no matter how safe we felt, no matter how hidden we were, they had agents who could walk through walls, who could sense our thoughts, who could not be stopped by blasters or armies or fortifications. They made the war feel deeply, terrifyingly personal. The most gut-wrenching part was the sheer helplessness they inspired. What do you do when your best weapon is a toy to your enemy? When your best defense is as flimsy as paper? You fall back on the only thing you have left that they can't so easily quantify: each other. You trust your squadmate to watch your back for the signs you might miss. You trust your mechanic to get your ship's engine started that one crucial half-second faster. You trust the brave, fragile web of spies and scouts in the intelligence network to get you that one priceless piece of warning, the only thing that could save you. He is here, because that's all you could ever hope for. A chance to run like hell, to live to fight another day, in a place where the shadows weren't quite so long, where the air didn't carry the sound of mechanical breathing or the hum of a spinning lightsaber. Alright, let's step away from the starfighters and the command centers for a minute. Forget the clean lines of a naval battle in space. Down here, it's messy, it's personal, and it's fought in some of the most miserable places the galaxy has to offer. Let's start with the swamp. Places like Dagobah, or worse, the bogs of Mimban. You haven't lived until you've tried to mount an ambush in a swamp. The air is so thick with moisture, you're basically breathing water. Your boots make a sickening slurp sound with every step, a sound that feels like it carries for clicks. Everything is wet all the time. Your clothes, your gear, your rations. It's all damp and starting to mildew. The bugs, criffing hell the bugs. They're not like the annoying flies back home. These are things with teeth that see you as a walking meal ticket. You have to seal your helmet just to sleep, and even then, you hear them buzzing outside, trying to find a way in. A patrol in the swamp is a slow, exhausting nightmare. You're not walking, you're wading. You're constantly scanning, not just for stormtroopers, but for the local wildlife that wants to eat you. A vine snake drops on you from a tree, and your heart tries to jump out of your chest. You have to check every patch of still water for quicksand or sinkholes. The Imperials have it worse though. Their white armour, in a green and brown swamp, they stick out like a bantha on a ballet stage. Their heavy gear sinks them deeper, You wait perfectly still, letting the leeches attach to you until a patrol wades into the kill zone. Then you open up from concealed positions, hit them hard and fast, and then you vanish back into the mist before they can call in air support. It's a dirty, brutal game of hide and seek. Now, flip it completely. The desert. Planets like Tatooine or Geonosis. Here, the enemy isn't the water, it's the lack of it. The sun is a merciless enemy. Your body is constantly screaming for water. The heat shimmers off the sand, creating mirages that look like approaching walkers. Your biggest worry isn't the Empire for most of the day. It's exposure. Sunstroke will kill you faster than a blaster bolt. You have to cover every inch of skin. Sand gets everywhere. I mean everywhere. In your blaster's action, in your food, in your eyes. It grinds down your gear and it grinds down your spirit. But the desert offers advantages. Visibility is incredible. You can see an Imperial patrol from kilometers away. This is where the hit-and-run raid is perfected. You travel by night, using the cold desert darkness for cover. You hit a small Imperial outpost at dawn, when the guards are tired and the sun is in their eyes. You use the speed of your repulsor lift transports, maybe a few stolen 74Z speeder bikes if you're lucky, to strike fast. You learn to read the dunes to find caves and rock formations to hide in. Survival is about water discipline. You sip, you never guzzle. You learn which cacti might hold a thimbleful of liquid. It's a war of endurance. Then there's the urban fight. This is maybe the toughest. Cities like on occupied Corellia or in the lower levels of Imperial centres. This is close quarters battle. Clearing rooms, fighting in corridors, rooftop to rooftop. There are no front lines. The enemy could be in the next building, the next room. You fight in apartments, in factories, in markets. The collateral damage is horrific. You're fighting where people live. It's a nightmare for morale. One wrong shot and you've blown up a family's home. The Imperials don't care about that, of course. They'll use entire city blocks as cover. An urban ambush is a thing of terrifying precision. You have to know the city like the back of your hand. The sewer accesses, the power conduits, the abandoned buildings that connect to each other. You let an Imperial patrol get deep into a narrow street or a city square, then you hit them from above, rooftops, windows, and from the sides. You use grenades to create chaos, to funnel them into kill zones. But it's also the easiest place to get trapped. One wrong move and they can seal off the street and bring in a whole company. The common thread in all of this? The Imperial patrol encounter. This is your daily bread. You're out on a reconnaissance mission, maybe 3 or 4 of you, and you stumble upon a squad of stormtroopers on their own patrol. There's that heart-stopping second where you lock eyes. It's pure instinct from there. There's no time for grand strategy. It's about who gets off the first shot, who has better cover, who has the cooler head. You learn their patterns fast. Stormtroopers are trained for formation fighting. They advance in lines, they lay down suppressing fire. They're predictable. We couldn't afford to be. We fought like the insurgents we were. We used asymmetrical tactics. One person draws their fire, while 2 others flank them. We used improvised explosives, thermal detonators rigged to motion sensors. We used the environment, lure them into the unstable cave, cut the support on the bridge, start an avalanche in the canyon. The bond between infantry is something else. It's thicker than blood. Your squad is your whole world. You know how each other thinks. You know who's a crack shot, who's good with explosives, who can patch up a wound under fire. You share your water, your ammo, your last protein bar. You sleep in shifts, back to back for warmth. When someone falls, you don't have time to mourn. You grab their dog tags, you grab their ammo, and you keep moving. You mourn later, in the silence, carrying the weight of their memory with you. This life isn't glorious. It's feet that are always sore. It's the constant low-grade hunger, because resupply is never guaranteed. It's the fear that's a cold stone in your gut, a feeling you learn to live with. It's looking at a beautiful sunset on an alien world and not seeing the beauty, just scanning it for silhouettes of ATST walkers. But there's a pride in it too, a deep, stubborn pride. You're the backbone. The pilots get the fancy kills, but we hold the ground. We are the face of the rebellion to the common people we liberate. We're the ones who dig the fortifications, who guard the perimeter, who bleed in the dirt so that others can dream of a free galaxy. There are no medals for most of what we do. The only reward is waking up the next day and seeing the person next to you wake up too. and knowing that for one more day, you've kept the darkness at bay. Alright, so let's shift gears completely. This is where the rebel spy lives. And let me tell you, it's a whole different kind of war. It's a war of paperwork and passwords, of sideways glances and sweaty palms. They don't get to wear a uniform. Their enemy isn't a TIE fighter screaming past. Their enemy is a doorbell ringing at the wrong hour. A little too much interest from a co-worker. A nervous tremor in your hand when you hand over your identification. Every single day is a high-wire act over a pit of vipers, and the only thing you're holding is your own nerve. Imagine waking up in a small, tidy apartment. The first thing you do is lie perfectly still and listen. You learn the soundtrack of your building, the hydrosonic shower of the man next door that kicks on at 6:30 precisely, the whir of the servo motors in the droid across the hall as it goes to collect the newsfeed, the faint sound of a child crying 2 floors down. This morning's symphony is your first intelligence report of the day. Any change, any silence where there shouldn't be, and your heart starts hammering against your ribs. A missing sound can be more terrifying than a blaster shot. That's your alarm clock. Pure, undiluted paranoia, and it's the only thing that keeps you alive. Your entire life is a lie, a carefully constructed shell. You have a name, a job, a history that some clever, tired analyst in a hidden base on Dantooine or Sullust cooked up for you. You have to become that person. You can't just play a part, you have to inhabit it. You work a boring, soul-crushing data entry job in some massive imperial bureaucracy, maybe in the Department of Sanitation or Planetary Surveys. You spend 8 hours a day typing numbers into a terminal, surrounded by people who genuinely believe in the new order. You have to nod along when they complain about rebel terrorists disrupting shipping lanes. You have to laugh at their stupid jokes about Wookiees. You have to stand respectfully when a junior officer walks past your cubicle. You have to pretend that the sight of a stormtrooper patrol marching through the office plaza doesn't make your mouth go dry and your hands turn to ice. The psychological grind of that is immense. It's a slow, constant pressure that threatens to crack your sanity. In a dogfight, the adrenaline is afire, hot and fast. It's over in minutes. This is a cold drip, drip, drip of anxiety. It's the fear that you'll slip up in your sleep, say the wrong name. It's the nightmare of accidentally using a rebel code phrase when you're ordering lunch. The hardest part of the job, it's the not stealing it too fast. It's having access to a terminal that holds the patrol routes for a Star Destroyer fleet. And you can't just download the whole thing. That would trigger every security alert from here to the core. No, you have to do it one tiny, seemingly insignificant piece at a time, over weeks, sometimes months. You make it look like routine background data traffic. A corrupted packet here, a system error there. It's like trying to empty a lake with a teaspoon while everyone watches. And if you spill a single drop, if you get greedy or impatient, you've endangered the entire network. The tools of the trade are elegant things of deception. A forged clearance chip, so perfect it can fool a standard terminal scan. A miniature slicer kit hidden inside, a perfectly ordinary-looking datapad, capable of creating backdoors in low-level security systems. A tiny comms device disguised as a hearing aid, allowing you to receive encrypted bursts of data that sound like static to anyone else. Your most valuable asset is your face. Can you look a stormtrooper in the eye lens and act appropriately annoyed at the inconvenience of his random inspection? Can you bluff your way past an ambitious Imperial naval lieutenant with a fake work order, projecting just the right amount of bureaucratic boredom? It's all about the performance. You're an actor on a stage where a bad review means a trip to an interrogation room that you won't be leaving. And the loneliness is a physical ache. It's a hollow feeling in your chest. You can't trust anyone, not your co-workers who invite you out for a drink after a long day. You build a wall of mundane excuses. You can't trust the friendly bartender at the cantina you frequent, because what if he's on someone's payroll? You certainly can't trust the charming stranger who buys you a drink and seems interested in you. Is it a genuine connection, or is it an ISB honey trap? Every smile is suspect. Every offer of friendship is a potential trap. Every relationship is a liability that could be used against you. You live inside your own head, a prisoner of your own secret. The only contact you have with the rebellion, with the idea of home, is a brief, encrypted data burst to a blind drop, a cavity in a wall, a loose panel in a public transport station. Then there are the moments of pure, heart-stopping action, which are nothing like the battles you see in holovids. They are bursts of terrifying silence, like the time you have to make a brush pass in a crowded maglev train during rush hour. The car is packed with bodies, a sea of grey uniforms and tired faces. You're carrying a data chip containing the security codes for a planetary shield gate. Your contact is a Twi'lek woman you've never seen before. You only know she'll be wearing a green scarf. You have about 3 seconds as the train doors open at a busy commercial station. The crowd surges. You bump into her, a little too hard to be accidental. You mutter a standard apology. "So sorry, my fault." And in that instant, the chip is gone from your palm into hers. And you're left on the train. For the next hour, you're convinced everyone on the train is an Imperial agent. You think your hand is glowing, that the guilt of what you just did is written on your face in bright, blinking letters. You analyze every face, every cough, every time someone looks in your direction. Is that a normal glance? Or are they studying me? This is the aftermath. The adrenaline has nowhere to go, so it turns inward into a corrosive acid of suspicion. Because getting caught isn't death. A quick blaster bolt to the head would be a mercy. It's worse. It's the Imperial Security Bureau. They are the masters of the Shadow War, and they are terrifyingly good at their jobs. They'll break you down with clever psychological tricks. They'll use your face, your codes, to set traps for your comrades. They'll send messages from your terminal, luring your cell members into an ambush. So while we're out here in the relative freedom of the Outer Rim, seeing the stars and taking potshots at Star Destroyers, remember the people buried deep inside the beast. The ones who wear the enemy's uniform, who speak their language, who live and breathe in the very heart of the oppression we're fighting. They don't get to see the stars from a cockpit canopy. They see them through the light-polluted haze of an ecumenopolis. They don't get the camaraderie of a rebel base, the shared laughter in a mess hall, the shoulder-to-shoulder feeling of being part of a team. Their war is fought in absolute solitude. It's a war of whispers and shadows, of data streams and nervous glances. It's fought in the cold, quiet spaces between heartbeats. And their courage is a different kind of courage. It's not the courage of a sudden, fiery burst of action. It's the courage to be alone, to be afraid every single second of every single day, and to still get up, put on the grey tunic of the enemy, and go to a job that slowly kills your spirit, all to move one tiny piece of data one step closer to helping the cause. Alright, snap back from the quiet terror of the spy. We're going to talk about Scarif. If the daily life of a rebel is a slow-burning fuse, a series of small resistances and hidden struggles, then Scarif is the moment that fuse hits the powder keg. It's the day everything changes from a struggle to survive into a full-blown, desperate, last-ditch battle for the very soul of the galaxy. And for most of us, it was our first real taste of a fight that big. We'd had skirmishes, hit-and-run attacks on supply depots, maybe an ambush on a patrol. But this was a direct assault on a fortified Imperial planetary facility. You felt the shift in gravity the moment the mission was briefed. This wasn't a mission you came back from. This was a message you delivered with your life. The thing you have to understand about Scarif from the very beginning is that nobody, and I mean nobody with a shred of conventional military sense, thought it was a good idea. From a pure tactical standpoint, it was the dictionary definition of suicide. A handful of ships from our fleet, a single company of ground troops, against a planetary shield gate, protected by a flotilla of Star Destroyers and a massive entrenched Imperial garrison on the ground. It was insanity, but that's the entire point. We'd just learned about the Death Star. We'd seen the seismic reports from Jeddah, the whispers of a whole holy city obliterated in an instant. And then, for those with the highest clearance, the confirmation of Alderaan, a planet, billions of people gone, just like that. When a monster that big, that utterly without conscience, is breathing down your neck, you don't have the luxury of waiting for the perfect plan, of building up your forces for another year. A year? The Empire could wipe out a dozen Alderaans in a year. You have to throw a punch with whatever you have, right now, because there might not be a tomorrow to plan for. So the debate was over whether we would die hiding or die trying to make a difference. When Mon Mothma and the other leaders gave the go-ahead, it was a moral decision. And that trickled down to us. We were people who had decided that this was the hill we were going to die on. So there we were, crammed into the holds of U-Wing transports, Captain Ramus Antilles' voice was steady, professional, but you could hear the tension underneath, the slight strain around the edges. We were flying right into the belly of the beast, and everyone on the command bridge knew it. The ride down through the atmosphere was the longest few minutes of your life. You're strapped in, shoulder to shoulder with your squad, staring at the blank metal wall of the transport, or the helmet of the person in front of you. Scarif is deceptively beautiful, a pristine tropical planet with impossibly blue oceans and vast white sand beaches. It looks like a vacation holiday, and we were about to turn a postcard into a nightmare. The contrast is something that stays with you, a cognitive dissonance that never quite resolves. You're running for your life, your boots sinking into the soft, hot sand, diving behind a palm tree for cover, while bright red blaster bolts are sizzling past your head, setting the fronds on fire. Your brain struggles to process the paradise while your body is screaming in survival mode. Our job on the ground was the beachhead. A simple, brutal objective. Create a perimeter, dig in, and cause enough of a distraction to draw the Imperial forces away from the Citadel Tower. We had to make them think the main attack was on the beach, so that Captain Andor's small Spec Ops team could slip through the chaos and get inside. On the map, it's a simple arrow. Hold this line. But on the ground, the line is fluid. It's smoke and screams and confusion. Stormtroopers in their spotless white armor, looking utterly alien and menacing against the bright sand, advanced in their relentless, overlapping lines. Their fire was suppressing, constant. You couldn't raise your head for more than a second. This is the moment where all the training, all the lectures, all the simulations just evaporate. Your world shrinks down to a tiny bubble. It's the patch of sand in front of your face, the rock to your left, the body of the person next to you. Meanwhile, overhead, a different kind of hell was unfolding. Our ships, the brave pilots of blue and red squadrons, were trying to keep the TIE fighters off our backs, but they were hopelessly, tragically outnumbered. You'd glance up during a reload, and the blue sky would be crisscrossed with laser fire. You'd see an A-Wing, one of our fastest, most agile ships, execute a perfect roll to avoid a twin-ion blast, only to fly directly into the path of another. It would just vanish. You'd see a Y-Wing bomber take a hit to its engine, trailing a thick plume of black smoke, and you'd hold your breath, your lips moving in a silent plea, praying to see the canopy blow and the pilot eject. Sometimes, a tiny white parachute would blossom. Most of the time, it was just the smoke, spiraling down into the ocean. And through all of this, underlying the immediate fight for the next inch of sand, was this creeping, cold dread. We were holding our position, but barely. Our ammunition was running critically low. We were rationing power packs. Our numbers were thinning. The initial fury of the assault had worn off, replaced by a grinding, exhausting war of attrition. And we all knew, from the constant chatter on the command channel, that the main Imperial fleet had been alerted and was on its way. This was a race against a clock that was ticking down to our absolute annihilation. Then the word crackled over the comms. The plans are away, the package is delivered. But in that moment, on that bloody beach, it was like a cool breeze in hell. It meant that Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor had done it. They'd fought their way to the top of the Citadel Tower. They'd transmitted the structural plans of the Death Star. It meant that this sacrifice, this madness, had a point. A feeling went through the ranks. It was too late, and we were too tired for joy. It was vindication. A deep, fierce sense of purpose. We had done the impossible. We had pulled it off. Now we just had to live with it, which, of course, we weren't going to. What happened next was biblical. The sky darkened with the immense dagger-like shapes of star destroyers emerging from hyperspace. They blotted out the sun, casting a cold, massive shadow over the entire beach. The scale of it was humbling, terrifying. We were insects, we were trapped, we were stuck on this beautiful, nightmarish island, and the sky was literally falling. The Imperial ground forces, sensing the end, pressed their advantage. But then, a strange thing happened. Their advance slowed, their blaster fire became sporadic, and then it stopped altogether. They started pulling back, retreating to their bunkers. For a second, a wild, impossible hope flickered. The water at the edge of the shore began to steam, then to boil. We looked up and we saw why. The Death Star had taken up a position in the sky above us. It was a god of death, preparing to speak. They were going to use their ultimate weapon on their own base, on their own troops. just to ensure that not a single one of us made it off that planet. That's the Empire. That's the true face of the enemy we were fighting. They would burn their own house down, sacrifice their own people, just to kill the few flies that had gotten inside. The white armor of the stormtroopers in the distance began to glow. The palm trees spontaneously combusted. The last thing you remember, the last thing any of us on that beach remember, is the sky turning in absolute silent white, a white that erased everything. Scarif was a defeat. Let's be absolutely clear about that. It was a massacre. Almost everyone who went down to that planet, from the admiral on the bridge to the lowest soldier on the beach, died there. But it was the defeat that made every victory after it possible. Because on that tiny corvette, the Tantive 4, speeding away from the Inferno, was a little astromech droid carrying a message of hope. A message that would find its way to a farm boy on Tatooine. Our loss was the first step toward their ultimate loss. And in a war like this, for a cause like ours, that's the only kind of victory that ever really counts. What's next? Where does a battered, grieving and hunted rebellion go after a blow like that? You don't go to a tropical paradise. You don't even go to a moderately comfortable, mid-rim world. You go to the coldest, most miserable, back end of nowhere hole in the galaxy you can possibly find. You go to Hoth, and you pray the Empire doesn't think to look for you on a ball of ice that would freeze the gears on a droid. For the first few days, the sheer effort of just not freezing to death was so all-consuming that there was no room for anything else. But that numbness wears off pretty fast, and then you're just left with the relentless, bitter cold and the constant daily struggle to stay alive. The first and most important lesson you learn on Hoth is that the primary enemy isn't the Empire. Not at first, anyway. The enemy is the planet itself. Hoth isn't a location. It's a living, breathing, malevolent entity that wants you dead. It's in the air, in the ice, in the very ground you walk on. Every single minute of every single day is a fight against the environment. Echo Base was a desperate, claustrophobic burrow, a frantic attempt to carve a little pocket of barely tolerable warmth out of a frozen wasteland that was constantly trying to reclaim it. Let's talk about the cold. You think you know what cold is? You don't. This is a cold that gets inside you. It's a deep, bone-deep, biting cold that seeps through the thickest insulation, through your thermal undersuit, through your body glove. It's cunning. It finds every tiny gap. A sliver of exposed skin between your glove and your sleeve will go numb in seconds. And if you're outside, it'll start to turn white with frostbite in under a minute. You wake up in your bunk and your breath has frozen on the ice wall next to your head, creating a small, sad glacier of your own exhalations. You have to chip it away with a vibro knife in the morning just to see the chrono. Your bunk is a thin mattress on a shelf carved directly into the ice. You sleep with every piece of clothing you own on, including your helmet sometimes to keep your ears from freezing, and you're still shivering through the night. You never feel truly warm. You just feel varying degrees of less cold. The base itself, Echo Base, was a masterpiece of make-do engineering, a testament to the ingenuity of our techs and mechanics. But it was always on the verge of falling apart. The main power generators, buried deep to hide their energy signature, were constantly fluctuating. The temperature would plummet so fast you could watch the moisture in the air crystallize and fall like tiny diamonds. The techs were the unsung heroes of Hoth, constantly battling a silent, losing war against the ice itself. Ice would melt from the body heat of hundreds of people. Water would drip, then refreeze somewhere else, cracking conduits, shorting out console panels, and jamming blast doors. The constant soundtrack of Hoth wasn't the hum of machinery or the chatter of personnel. It was the persistent, maddening drip, drip, drip of water melting and refreezing, and the low, anxious groan of a generator straining under a load it was never meant to bear. Then there's the food. Remember those bland, reconstituted meal packs we all complained about on Yavin? The ones that tasted like cardboard and nostalgia? You'd fight a wampa for one of those on Hoth. Our primary source of nutrition was this thick, nutrient-rich grey paste made from the native fungi and lichens that the biology team managed to cultivate in a dimly lit, humid cavern they called the Fungus Farm. It was officially called Nutritional Concentrate Type 3. Everyone else called it Hoth Mush. It tasted like boiled leather and disappointment, with an aftertaste of regret. It was almost never served warm, because heating up hundreds of portions used a catastrophic amount of power. Your daily routine, if you weren't on a specific duty like sensor operation or generator maintenance, was a soul-crushing cycle of boredom punctuated by spikes of sheer terror. You'd spend hours in the main hangar, meticulously cleaning and recalibrating your blaster. A moisture trap in the gas chamber could freeze, and a frozen blaster is just a very expensive club. Your life depended on that piece of equipment working perfectly. You'd take long, lonely shifts on the perimeter turrets, staring out into a vast, empty landscape of blinding white, your eyes playing tricks on you after an hour, seeing the menacing shapes of AT-AT walkers in every snowdrift. The silence outside was absolute and deafening. It was so quiet you could hear the blood pumping in your ears, a reminder that you were alive in a place that wanted you dead. And then there were the patrols. This was the one time you got to leave the claustrophobic, icy tomb of the base, and you dreaded it almost as much as you looked forward to it. You'd spend an hour suiting up in the bulky, restrictive, cold weather gear, sealing every seam, checking your oxygen mix, and then you'd climb into the cockpit of a T-47 airspeeder, the ones we retrofitted with tow cables and harpoons, and called snow speeders. You'd pray to the force that the engines would turn over in the sub-zero temperatures. Snow speeders were tough, agile little ships, but the cold was brutal on them. The hydraulic controls for the harpoon were always stiff. The canopy would frost over from the inside from your breath, and you'd fly out into a howling gale that could push your lightweight craft around like a toy. A standard patrol was 4 to 6 hours of mind-numbing monotony. You'd fly a pre-programmed grid pattern over the same frozen canyons, the same endless ice plains, watching your sensor screen for any sign of movement that wasn't a native tauntaun or a scurrying womp rat. It was hypnotic and boring, but that boredom could vanish in a heartbeat. That was the rhythm of life on Hoth. Hours of soul-crushing boredom, then a few minutes of sheer, gut-wrenching panic, then a wave of relief so strong it made you lightheaded, and then back to the boredom. It was an emotional roller coaster that never ended. You lived with this permanent knot of anxiety in your stomach, this unshakable certainty that the other shoe was about to drop. The tension was a physical thing in the base. Arguments would flare up over nothing, a misplaced tool, a cut in the mess line, because everyone was stretched so thin. And the strangest thing happened. The fear you'd been carrying around for months, the dread that had been your constant companion, suddenly vanished. It was replaced by a strange, cold hyper-clarity. The waiting was over, the ambiguity was gone. The planet itself was no longer the enemy. The real enemy was here, in walking armoured tanks, and they were coming for us. As we scrambled to our positions, pulling on helmets, grabbing extra power packs, as the giant, terrifying, insect-like shapes of the AT-AT walkers emerged from the blizzard like ancient monsters, you realised something. Hoth had prepared us for this. The cold had made us tough. The constant struggle for survival had made us resilient. The months of boredom and fear had forged us into something harder. We weren't the same scared, traumatized survivors who had fled here after Scarif. We were a garrison, we were dug in, and we were ready to fight for our little pocket of warmth, for our miserable, frozen home, tooth and nail, until the very last second. The Battle of Hoth was a tactical loss. We were outgunned and outmaneuvered. We had to abandon Echo Base, scattering into the galaxy once more. But just surviving that place, just living through those months of ice, fear and isolation, was a strategic victory in itself. It proved that the rebellion could endure anything the galaxy threw at us. We could survive a planet that actively wanted us dead. And that resilience, that stubborn will to live, was a weapon the Empire could never understand and could never defeat. A war is 1,000 small fires burning all at once. It's a constant grinding struggle across dozens, hundreds of star systems. For every famous battle like Hoth, there were a dozen other fights, other campaigns that never got the spotlight, that never had a droid there to record it for history. These are the battles that truly built the rebellion. In the early and middle years, we were a patchwork quilt. You had your main fleet, sure, the one that eventually coalesced around Mon Mothma and Admiral Akbar. But then you had all these individual cells, the partisans sawing Saw Gerrera, the Phoenix Cell, the team on Lothal, and 100 planetary resistance movements from Ryloth to Dantooine. They're all fighting the Empire, but they're doing it their own way, with their own tactics, their own commanders, and their own desperate shortages. And their battles? They were messy, brutal, inglorious, and absolutely essential. They were the threads that, when woven together, created a net strong enough to finally catch the Empire. Let's start with the Battle of Mimban. It's a soggy, rainy, miserable world where the Empire is digging for something. Duniamore, Tibanna gas, maybe just the pleasure of strip mining a world into oblivion. Whatever it is, it's valuable enough to warrant a massive Imperial occupation force. The fight there, a ground war, a filthy trench warfare slog that would have felt familiar to soldiers from 1,000 years ago. This was the war after the glamour had worn off. Our people there, allied with the native Mimbanese, were the Mimbanese Liberation Army. They were fighting in rags caked with mud, in trenches filled with stagnant, knee-deep water, under a near-constant downpour that rusted your blaster if you didn't clean it every hour. Infections from the mud were as deadly as blaster bolts. And then there were the Imperial Walkers. The AT-ATS were too heavy for the terrain, but the smaller AT-ST Scout Walkers were a constant menace. The Mimban campaign became a war of ambushes and traps, of cleverness over firepower. They'd lure the chicken-legged walkers into areas of deep bog, where the Imperial pilots, overconfident in their machinery, would sink up to their knees in the muck, becoming sitting ducks for well-placed explosives or a lucky shot to the viewport. It was ugly, inglorious work. That was the real, overarching strategy of the Alliance. Death by 1,000 cuts. Mimban was a deep, bleeding cut that the Empire constantly had to bandage. Then you have the Shadow War, the fights that happened in the corporate sector. Now that's a strange and slippery place. It's not officially Imperial territory, not really. It's run by the corporate sector authority, a bunch of mega-corporations who care more about profit margins than they do about political ideologies. The Empire, of course, has massive interests there. Secret weapons testing labs, critical shipping lanes, puppet CEOs. Our operations there were less about direct combat and more about economic sabotage and industrial espionage. It was a Cold War fought with data spikes and manipulated stock prices. And what about the space battles we never saw? We all know about the Death Star runs, but the galaxy is a vast place, and most of our naval engagements were much smaller, much more chaotic. There was the raid on the Ring of Catherine. This was a massive donut-shaped deep space station, a bustling, lawless trade hub where everyone from legitimate merchants to smugglers and spies crossed paths. Intelligence discovered that a high-ranking Imperial Moth was using a casino on the ring as a secret meeting place to negotiate with weapons dealers from the Hutt cartel. The goal wasn't to destroy the station. That would have killed thousands of civilians. The mission was to go in unmarked, beat-up-looking freighters, disrupt the meeting, steal the Moth's payment, a fortune in Orodium ingots, and get out without starting a full-scale battle. It was a brawl in a crowded marketplace, a chaotic close-quarters knife fight between our modified freighters and the Moth's personal guard in nimble patrol craft, all taking place within the crowded shipping lanes of the station's interior. It was messy and fast. Pilots were dodging shipping containers and civilian yachts while trading laser fire. We got the Orodium, we humiliated the Moth, and we slipped away before the local security force could even figure out who to shoot at. That Orodium funded the rebellion's fuel, food and weapons for almost a year. Sometimes, a perfectly executed heist that leaves your enemy looking foolish is more valuable than a heroic last stand. We also can't forget the Mon Cala uprising. This was a huge one, and its importance can't be overstated. The Mon Calamari are our staunchest allies, the builders of our finest ships. But it wasn't always that way. The Empire occupied their beautiful water world, trying to crush their independent spirit and take control of the legendary Mon Calamari shipyards. This was a war unlike any other. Mon Calamari and Quarren resistance fighters, often putting aside ancient grudges, used spears, harpoons, and domesticated sea monsters like the fearsome Sando Aqua monster against the Empire's amphibious assault tanks and specialized underwater troopers in pressurized armor. Imagine fighting in that, the immense silent pressure, the freezing cold, the limited visibility with giant alien sea creatures gliding through the darkness above you. It was a brutal, grueling campaign of sabotage against underwater mining facilities and ambushes in kelp forests. The victory there, when they finally managed to drive the Imperial fleet away, was a strategic earthquake. It gave us the Mon Calamari fleet, every single MC-80 star cruiser you saw at the Battle of Endor, every vessel that formed the unbreakable backbone of our fleet, is there because of a brutal, desperate, underwater war that most of the galaxy never knew happened. Their war was fought in the silence of the deep, and its echoes thundered across the stars. Then there were the purely defensive battles, the ones we fought simply to survive. The evacuation of Dantooine is burned into my memory, after Princess Leia's famous lie to Grand Moff Tarkin, telling him the rebel base was on Dantooine. The Empire sent a punitive force to glass the planet. There was no base there. The Empire's response was pure spiteful terror. Our job was to get as many civilians out as we could before the Star Destroyers arrived in orbit. This is the true history of our war. It was fought in the mud of Mimban, in the deep oceans of Mon Cala, in the trading hubs and financial networks of the corporate sector. It was fought by partisans with homemade thermal detonators, by slicers with stolen codes, by pilots on suicide runs to save a single transport. For every Luke Skywalker making the impossible shot into a thermal exhaust port, there were 10,000 unknown souls, a farmer turned soldier pulling a trigger in a forgotten trench, a technician rerouting a power grid to cause a blackout, a medic patching up a blaster wound in the hold of a fleeing ship. The Galactic Civil War wasn't one story told in a holovid. It was 10,000 different stories, all happening simultaneously across the vast expanse of the galaxy. Our strength was never in our fleet or our firepower, because we were always outgunned. It was in our diversity, our decentralized nature, our stubbornness, and our willingness to fight the Empire, anywhere, anytime, on any terms. We hit them in their boardrooms and their banks. We hit them in their mud and their oceans. We were a hydra. They could cut off one head, a cell on Lothal, a base on Hoth, but 2 more would grow back in some forgotten corner of the galaxy they never even thought to look. And that relentless, widespread, unpredictable resistance, more than any single battle, is what slowly, inexorably, broke their will and shattered their empire. You know, we always talk about the big picture of the rebellion, but for guys like you and me, the folks just trying to get through a double shift in the hangar bay, or a long cold night on patrol, the war had a different texture. It was about the people. And I'm not just talking about your squad mates, I'm talking about them. The ones whose names everyone knew, the living legends. Fighting in the rebellion was a strange mix of terror and mind-numbing boredom. You'd have 10 seconds of pure chaos that felt like an eternity, followed by 10 hours of waiting for something, anything, to happen. And in those quiet hours, that's when the rumours would fly, especially about the heroes. They were like constellations we navigated by. Let's start with the one everyone had an opinion on, Han Solo. Oh man, the stories about Han were the best. They were less like military briefings and more like folk tales. You'd hear a guy from the Corellian sector swear up and down that he'd seen Solo talk his way out of an Imperial blockade by convincing the commander he was a lost wedding barge. Another guy would claim Solo won the Millennium Falcon in a sabacc game with a single insane bluff, and that the ship's previous owner was still trying to figure out what happened. For us regular rebels, Han was a paradox. On one hand, he was everything we were supposedly fighting against. A smuggler, a scoundrel, out for himself. The officers, the real by-the-book types, they'd scoff. You'd hear them muttering about undisciplined riffraff and a bad influence. But for every one of those officers, there were 50 of us grunts who saw something else. We saw a guy who'd been out there in the real galaxy, who knew how to survive, not by following rules, but by trusting his gut. His presence was a quiet reassurance that maybe you didn't need to be a perfect soldier to make a difference. You just needed to be clever enough, and maybe a little bit lucky. And the Wookiee, Chewbacca, forget about it. He was a myth all by himself. The first time you saw him walk through a corridor, you'd just stop and stare. You'd hear stories about him pulling the arms off stormtroopers. I never saw that happen personally, and I'm okay with that, but you'd see him doing maintenance on the Falcon, and he could lift a hyperdrive motivator that took 4 of us with a grav lift to move. That was enough proof for me. The general feeling was, you stay on Solo's good side, and you definitely, under any circumstances, stay on Chewbacca's good side. There was an unspoken rule. If you saw the Wookiee looking agitated, you just found a different route. No questions asked. Take Princess Leia. To the galaxy, she's a senator, a symbol of defiance. To us grunts, she was the one who never slept. You'd be pulling a double shift on the command deck of Home 1. It's the middle of the night cycle. The only sounds are the low hum of the hyperdrive and the quiet chatter of the sensor operators. And you'd see her, just standing there, silhouetted against the starlight from the main viewport, staring at a star chart that was probably showing a dozen different Imperial fleet movements. She'd have a cup of what might have been caf 3 hours ago, cold and forgotten by her elbow. She had this intensity that could power a small starship. It wasn't a loud intensity, it was a quiet, burning focus. You'd nod at her as you walked past, feeling a little awkward, and she'd give you this little, tired smile. It wasn't a royal greeting, it was the look of someone else who was in the trenches, who understood what it was like to be far from home and scared. That smile did more for morale than a week's worth of rations. It made you stand up a little straighter. You were trying to keep up with a woman who carried the weight of Alderaan on her shoulders every single day, and still found time to ask a lowly tech specialist if they'd gotten any rack time. But the real enigma, the one that took the most getting used to, was Luke Skywalker, the farm boy who became a Jedi. Now, let me tell you, the Jedi were ancient history, a fairy tale our grandparents told us. They were myths like ghosts or sun dragons. So when the rumour started circulating through the ranks that we had one, a real one, walking among us, let's just say people were skeptical. You'd expect some grand mystical figure, right? Flowing robes, a constant glow about him, maybe floating a few inches off the ground. The reality was quieter. He was just a kid, a polite, kinda shy kid with bright blue eyes who always seemed a little surprised to be there. He didn't command a room like Leia or dominate it like Han. He just was. And then he'd do something that would make the hair on your arms stand up. You remember one time, a bunch of us were trying to get a malfunctioning power converter to work on a GR-75 transport. We were due to evacuate a cell of sympathizers in 2 days, and this transport was critical. We were sweating, cursing, taking the whole thing apart and putting it back together, hitting it with a hydro spanner. The usual time-honored engineering procedure. Luke was walking by, probably heading to the flight sims. He stopped for a second and just looked at the scattered parts. He didn't say a word, he just kind of focused. His gaze went distant, like he was listening to a sound none of us could hear. Then he pointed to a nearly invisible hairline fracture in the primary coupling housing. "I think it's cracked there," he said. Then he gave you that earnest smile and walked on. Their presence was a morale boost you can't quantify. Command could give all the inspiring speeches they wanted, but seeing the Falcon touch down after a risky reconnaissance mission, scorched and battered but in one piece, or spotting Luke heading to his X-Wing, that was the real speech. It was a living, breathing reminder that this was a family, a deeply weird, dysfunctional and glorious family. You had your stern, caring older sister in Leia, your cocky, brilliant older brother in Han, and your kinda magical, surprisingly humble younger brother in Luke. And like any family, they drove each other crazy. Of course, it wasn't all hero worship. There were quirks that became the stuff of legend on the lower decks. The constant, barely veiled bickering between Han and Leia was a source of endless entertainment and betting pools. You'd be in a high-level briefing, Admiral Akbar laying out a serious tactical plan for a fleet engagement, and those two would start up. It was better than any holodrama. And then there were the moments that cemented their legend in our minds, in the stories we'd tell each other over recycled water in the barracks. You'll never forget the time a small supply convoy got ambushed near the Rimmer trade route. A couple of GR-75s got shot up pretty bad by a lone Imperial patrol frigate that got lucky, and you had pilots stranded in life pods. The Falcon was the closest ship, doing a sensor sweep in a nearby nebula. Now, standard procedure is to wait for backup, secure the area, approach with caution. It's what the manual says. It's what keeps you alive. Han Solo didn't have a manual. You listened to the comms traffic from the command center. It was chaos. Blaster fire from the frigate's complement of troopers who had boarded one of the transports, screaming, the panicked calls of the lifepod beacons, and Chewbacca roaring in the background. Then Han's voice, crackling over the speaker. "Okay, Chewie, let's give him a light show." You could hear the roar of the Falcon's engines and Han muttering to himself. He single-handedly took out 2 TIE fighters that were strafing the life pods, while Chewie executed a rescue maneuver that should have, by all laws of physics, ripped the Falcon in half. They flew so close to the disabled transport that they practically scraped paint, drawing the frigate's fire away, while a shuttle managed to get in and extract the survivors. They pulled 3 pilots out of the vacuum that day. When they got back, Han was already complaining to the deck chief about the laser cannon calibration, acting like he'd just taken a quick trip to the store. That's the stuff you remember. That's the kind of leader you follow into hell itself, because you know he's not asking you to do anything he wouldn't do first. He wasn't a general. He was a guy with a fast chip and a good heart. So when you ask what it was like to serve with the legends, it was this strange, wonderful mix of the ordinary and the extraordinary. They were just people, with all the flaws, quirks and annoyances that come with it. But they were also these massive gravitational forces that pulled the rest of us along, making us believe, truly believe, in our guts that a single farm boy, a grieving princess, and a scruffy-looking smuggler could actually stare down the entire galactic empire and change the fate of the galaxy. And you know what? They did. They made us feel like you were part of their crew. That belief, that feeling of connection, was a weapon more powerful than any turbolaser. It was the reason we kept fighting when things looked hopeless, and that belief was about to be tested like never before. Because all the little fights, the hit-and-run attacks, the secret missions, they were all converging, leading to one place. A place we'd only heard about in encrypted briefings. A green moon orbiting a gas giant, where the Empire was building something new, something terrible. A place called Endor. You asked about Endor? Yeah, you were there. See, after years of hit and run, of being the mosquito buzzing around the bantha of the Empire, we were going for the head. A second Death Star. Just the name was enough to make veterans of Yavin go pale. You'd see them in the mess hall, their hands shaking just a little when they picked up their caf mug. The first one was a terror. A second one felt like the universe was just plain unfair. But the intel was solid. The Emperor himself was going to be there. It was a trap, obviously. We all knew it. Akbar practically said it out loud. But it was a trap we had to spring. This was it. The final hand of Sabak for the whole galaxy. And we were going all in with a pair of 2s. You were assigned to the ground team. Spec Forces. Sounds fancy, right? It meant you got to carry a heavier blaster rifle and had a slightly better chance of being vaporized on the ground instead of in the cold vacuum of space. Your job was simple, the kind of simple that gets you killed. Knock out the shield generator protecting the Death Star. The entire fate of the Rebel Alliance, of every hope for a free galaxy, rested on a few dozen of us, not tripping over a root in a dark forest. No pressure. Flying through the Imperial fleet was a special kind of nightmare. You're sitting in the dark, strapped into an acceleration couch, listening to the static of the comms and the thrum of the shuttle's engines. The only light is the faint glow from the cockpit and the pinpricks of stars outside. You're waiting for some Imperial traffic controller with a suspicious mind. We slipped through the biggest concentration of Imperial power since the Battle of Coruscant, like a ghost. I think I aged 5 years in those 10 minutes. Then we were down. The ramp lowered, and the air of Endor hit you like a wet blanket. It was thick, humid, and smelled of damp earth, rotting leaves, and strange, sweet flowers. It was so alive. After years on starships and sterile bases, where the only smells were recycled air, engine coolant, and nervous sweat, the sheer organic noise and smell of the place was overwhelming. Creepy, crawly things rustled in the undergrowth. Unseen animals made weird hooting calls. The wind sighed through the giant trees. It felt ancient and peaceful. It felt wrong. You know the story of the Ewoks. From the outside, it's a joke, right? Teddy bears with sticks and stones taking on the galactic empire. But let me tell you, when you're face to face with a whole tribe of them, and they've got you surrounded, nets dropping from the trees, and you're tied to a spit next to your commanding officer, who's about to be the main course at a feast, it's not so funny. Now we're prisoners, convinced we're going to be roasted alive by creatures we could probably bench press. Then 3PO is standing on a log, babbling away, and they're treating him like a golden god descended from the heavens. It was the weirdest, most surreal diplomatic negotiation I've ever seen. Han's face was a picture. He'd faced down bounty hunters and star destroyers, but a bunch of 3-foot-tall fuzzy creatures, waving spears and bowing to a protocol droid, had him completely flummoxed. But that weirdness, that absolute absurdity, is what saved us. The Ewoks defended their home. They knew the forest like we knew the layout of our own blasters. They turned the entire moon into a death trap for the Imperial stormtroopers. Those white-armoured guys were trained for urban combat, for fleet engagements, for orderly lines of fire. They weren't trained for logs swinging out of the darkness, or nets dropping from the canopy, or angry bears dropping rocks on their heads from 100 feet up. The Empire's greatest strength, its rigid, predictable order, was its biggest weakness in that chaotic, living jungle. Watching an AT-ST walker get tripped up by a bunch of logs and vines, then swarmed by dozens of tiny, furious warriors, was a thing of beauty. It was a lesson. Never underestimate the little guy. Your part, the main event, was the bunker. A big, ugly, imperial grey structure plopped down in the middle of all that green like a metal wart. It was surrounded by a perimeter fence and lit up like a Coruscant nightclub. The plan was simple, the kind they teach you in basic training. Use the forest for cover, sneak in under the cover of the Ewok diversion, plant the charges on the generator, sneak out. It went wrong, spectacularly wrong, about 30 seconds after we broke from the tree line. An entire legion of the Emperor's best troops, the ones with the shiny black armor, was waiting for us. We were surrounded, pinned down behind whatever cover we could find. Then something shifted. I don't know who started it, maybe it was the Ewoks, but the fight changed. It stopped being a military assault and turned into a brawl. A wild, desperate, cornered animal fight for survival. We saw Ewoks, these tiny creatures, showing more courage than a whole battalion of stormtroopers. They were taking down AT-ST walkers by sheer numbers and bravery, swarming them like insects, sacrificing themselves to jam spears into viewports or pull out wiring. It was heartbreaking and inspiring all at once. Our guys, seeing that, found a second wind. We fought like demons. That's when Han, that beautiful crazy bastard, managed to get inside one of the walkers we'd disabled. You've never seen anything like it. We broke through. We got into the bunker. Every second felt like an hour. Then the charges were set. The order to fall back was given. We spilled out of that bunker, running for the tree line, and just as we dove for cover, the whole world behind us turned white and orange. The bunker erupted in a fireball that lit up the night sky, turning the forest into a stark landscape of light and shadow. The shield was down. We'd done it, but the celebration was cut short before it even started, because up there, in the blackness of space, our friends were dying. From the ground you couldn't see much, just the occasional flicker of light in the sky, like distant lightning on a summer night. But you could hear it on the comms, and that was 1,000 times worse. The fleet had jumped in, right on schedule, right into the jaws of the trap. The Death Star was operational, and it was firing. Not on military targets first, no, it was destroying our capital ships, Mon Calamari cruisers that had been homes to thousands of us. For years they were just gone, vaporized by that green beam of pure death. The comm traffic was a soundtrack to a massacre. We'd done our job, we'd given them a chance, and it was a chance that was costing them everything. The shield was down, but the Death Star was still there, a hammer about to crush the entire rebel fleet. That feeling, standing there in the jungle, the heat from the burning bunker on your face, watching the silent, twinkling lights in the sky, knowing you're safe on the ground, but your entire family, your pilots, your mechanics, your friends, are being murdered in orbit. It's a special kind of hell. We didn't know it then, but Lando Calrissian and Wedge Antilles were leading a suicide run down the trench, right into the reactor core, just like at Yavin. And somewhere in the heart of that battle station, Luke was facing the Emperor, redeeming his father, and sacrificing himself to destroy the Sith. We didn't know any of that. We were just grunts on a moon, listening to the galaxy change on a crackling comm channel. All we knew was the flickering lights in the sky suddenly blossomed into a silent, massive explosion. It was weird seeing it without sound. A new, tiny sun bloomed in the night, a beautiful, terrible flower of white and yellow and orange, expanding and then fading just as quickly, leaving our afterimage burned into your eyes. The Death Star, it's gone. It was a release, a roar of pure, unadulterated relief and joy that had been pent up for decades. It was a sound that came from the very core of our being. Grown men and women, tough commandos, who'd seen friends die hours before, were crying, hugging each other, hugging Ewoks. The Ewoks were chanting, dancing around the fires, sensing our joy and adding their own to it. It was chaos, but it was the most beautiful chaos I've ever seen. We had done it. Against all odds, through luck, pluck, and a lot of help from some furry friends, we had actually done it. The celebration on Endor itself lasted a couple of days. It was a blur of Ewok feasts. You're still not entirely sure what that roasted meat was, and you've decided you're better off not knowing. Bad singing in both basic and Ewoksy, and that fermented drink that could probably strip the carbon scoring off a blaster barrel. It was a necessary release, a pressure valve blowing off after 20 years of tyranny. We slept where we fell, laughed at nothing, and hugged people we'd barely spoken to before. For a little while, we were just happy, but after the hangovers cleared, a new feeling set in. What do we do now? We were soldiers without a war. Our entire identity, our purpose, our daily routine for years had been defined by the fight. What do you do when the fight is over? You can't just hang up your blaster and become a moisture farmer overnight. Well, some tried. It usually didn't work out. The first tangible sign that things were really changing on a galactic scale was the news from the HoloNet. Or I should say, the return of something resembling real news. For most of your life, the HoloNet was just the Imperial propaganda network. Glorious, sanitized shots of Star Destroyers gliding in perfect formation. Boring speeches from pompous moffs. Dire warnings about the violent terrorist alliance. It was background noise designed to make you feel small and powerless. But a few days after Endor, the signal started to get fuzzy. Different voices started breaking through, weak and staticky at first. Then whole planets started seizing control of their transmitters. We managed to patch a receiver into the Falcon's comm system, and we all gathered around, a bunch of grimy rebels and curious Ewoks, watching the galaxy wake up. We saw celebrations on Corellia, shipyards workers dancing on the hulls of half-built freighters. We saw the factories of Sullust light up the night sky with fireworks, not industrial smog. We saw footage from the mid-rim sectors, people pouring into the streets, pulling down grotesque statues of Palpatine, tearing up Imperial flags, and using them as rags to clean the grime of 2 decades off their buildings. It was incredible to watch, like a wave of light and colour washing across the galaxy, pushing back the grey shadow of the Empire. We'd been fighting in the dark for so long, often feeling like we were the only ones. We didn't realise how many people were just waiting for a sign, a crack in the Empire's armour. Our victory at Endor was that crack, and the whole galaxy poured through it. But it wasn't all partying and flag burning. The Empire was a beast with tentacles in every system. It didn't just raise a white flag and surrender because the boss was dead. Oh no, it was like cutting the head off a rancor. The body doesn't die, it thrashes around blind and furious, causing a whole lot of damage on its way out. Warlords popped up everywhere. Ambitious Imperial moffs, with their own private fleets and armies, looked at the power vacuum and decided, why not me? They carved out little fiefdoms, calling themselves Grand Moffs, or Imperial Regents. There were rumours that Grand Admiral Thrawn, this terrifyingly brilliant tactician, was still out there, somewhere in the unknown regions, a ghost waiting in the wings. The Imperial Security Bureau, the Emperor's secret police, didn't vanish. They just went to ground, becoming a network of spies, saboteurs, and terrorists, sowing chaos to destabilise the new government. The war wasn't over, it had just changed shape. It went from a giant set-piece war between 2 massive fleets to 1,000 smaller, nastier, more confusing fights across 1,000 worlds. It was a lot harder to fight a shadow than a Star Destroyer. For us, the Rebellion, we had to change overnight. The alliance to restore the Republic had to become the New Republic. Sounds nice and clean on a political leaflet, right? Let me tell you, the transition was anything but smooth. It was like trying to rebuild a starship while it's flying through an asteroid field. And the politics, criffing hell, the politics. When you're fighting the Empire, everything is simple. Black and white, us versus them, good versus evil. The lines are clear. But once you win, suddenly the us starts to fracture. You had the idealists, like Mon Mothma, who wanted to restore the old Republic with all its democratic ideals, its Senate, its bureaucracy, a return to the way things were before the dark times. Then you had the military minds, like General Medine, who argued, convincingly, that we needed a strong hand to keep the peace, that we couldn't afford to be soft and decentralized while Imperial remnants with superstar destroyers were still on the loose. And then you had the planetary factions, all with their own demands, their own grudges, their own agendas. The core worlds wanted stability and trade. The outer rim worlds wanted autonomy and a share of the wealth. It was enough to make you miss the straightforwardness of a dogfight. At least in a dogfight, you know who's shooting at you. What happened to the big heroes? They scattered, and that, more than any political speech, was the first real sign that the family we'd built was breaking up. The war was the glue that held us together. Without it, we all had to find our own paths. Princess Leia, she became Ambassador Leia, then Chancellor Leia. She was born for that world. She was a politician by blood and by training, but her heart had been forged in the rebellion. She dove into the messy, frustrating, soul-crushing work of building the New Republic headfirst. But the weight on her didn't get lighter, it just changed. Instead of worrying about Imperial patrols finding our base, she was worrying about interplanetary trade routes, relief efforts for famine-stricken worlds, and mediating political squabbles between senators who seemed more concerned with their own power than the good of the galaxy. She was still the same fierce, determined woman we'd follow anywhere, but you could see the toll it took. The war was simple. Peace was complicated. Han Solo, what do you think happened to Han? He stuck around for a little while, mostly because of Leia. You could see he was trying, but a smuggler in a dress uniform at a diplomatic function is like a Wookiee at a ballet. It just doesn't work. The bureaucracy, the rules, the endless meetings where people debated the wording of a resolution for 6 hours, it was choking him. You'd see him getting that twitch in his eye, the one he always got right before he did something stupidly brilliant. He and Chewie eventually took off on the Falcon. And Luke. Luke was the biggest mystery of all. The New Republic would have given him anything. A seat on the ruling council, command of the entire military, his own academy. But he disappeared. He came to us all before he left. He said he was going on a journey. He was looking for something, he said. Old Jedi knowledge, artifacts, a deeper understanding of the Force. He felt a responsibility to rebuild the Jedi Order, but he knew he couldn't do it from the heart of a new government. He needed to understand what it truly meant to be a Jedi, away from the politics and the pressure. He'd show up from time to time over the years, a quiet, calm presence, offering wisdom or a crucial hand in a crisis, but he was never part of the machinery. I think he knew deep down that the galaxy's next hope wasn't a Jedi with a laser sword making pronouncements from on high. It was the everyday people with all their flaws, learning to govern themselves. His job was to be a guide, not a ruler. So what was left for people like you? For the average soldier, the mechanic, the pilot? For a lot of us, it was a hard landing. Some stayed in, forming the backbone of the New Republic defense fleet. They traded their nimble X-Wings for the bigger, slower patrol ships of a peacekeeping force. Their job was no longer daring raids. It was showing the flag, chasing down pirate bands that were often just Imperial holdouts in disguise, a boring but necessary duty. Others mustered out. We were given a small stipend, a handshake, and a thanks for saving the galaxy. It was well meant, but it didn't really help you figure out the rest of your life. Going home was strange. You went back to your homeworld. The Imperial refueling station was still there, a hulking, silent monument to the occupation, but it was abandoned, already being picked apart by scavengers. The planet was the same, but everything was different. And you were different. You can't unsee the things you'd seen. The battles were over, but the war was still raging in our dreams. Every scar, every nightmare, every friend we left behind on a dozen forgotten worlds. It was worth it. Because you got to see kids growing up without having to look over their shoulder for a stormtrooper patrol. You got to see a free press criticize a chancellor without anyone disappearing in the night. You got to see a galaxy, bruised and battered, slowly, painfully healing itself. You ended up using your skills not for fighting, but for building. You helped start a small shipping cooperative, nothing fancy, just moving goods between systems that hadn't been able to trade freely in a generation. It felt good. It felt like we were still rebuilding, just in a different way. The New Republic wasn't perfect. It was messy, it was argumentative, it was slow, and it made a lot of mistakes. And maybe that was the whole point. After the absolute rigid, suffocating order of the Empire, a little mess was a beautiful thing. That's the story. From a scared kid joining up to an old man watching a new generation fly their own ships off into a galaxy full of possibilities. It was a hell of a ride, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything.